Hi viewers, in this class we are going to discuss classical conditioning. Apart from the animal behavior, apart from the learning methods, it is a precious method, classical conditioning. Under this topic we will discuss introduction and definition to the classical conditioning, principles of learning, law of contiguity, law of repetition, law of reinforcement, and law of interference, and finally the biochemical mechanisms behind the classical conditioning. Let us see one by one. Usually, stimulus that elicits a response is known as natural stimulus, otherwise unconditioned stimulus. Stimulus that cannot elicit a response is known as the neutral stimulus. In the classical conditioning, neutral stimulus is combined with natural stimulus. Training will be given for long time. After that, the neutral stimulus also elicits a response. Hence, the neutral stimulus now known as the conditioned stimulus. The natural stimulus is the unconditioned stimulus, but the neutral stimulus, after it attains the ability to extract the response from elicits the response from the organism, then that is known as the conditioned stimulus. Now, neutral stimulus training brings out a response is known as a conditioned response. It is known as the conditioned response. And there was a great scientist behind this classical conditioning. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a Russian biologist exploring the mysteries of behavior. Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, first described the classical conditioning in the year 1899 while conducting research into the digestive system of dogs. He was particularly interested in the role of salivary secretions in the digestion of food and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine or Physiology in 1904. This was a setup done by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, where the dog is fixed to a strand, and here there is a visible screen. We can watch the dog from outside, but the dog unable to see us. And there is a food bowl, and there is arrangement for the measurement of the saliva. So the tube collects the saliva, and thereby we can record the amount of saliva, and later on we will measure it. And here, usually whenever you give meat powder as the food material for the dog, then usually it secretes the saliva. The meat is the unconditioned stimulus, and saliva for meat is unconditioned response, natural phenomena. And here, if you ring a bell, then thereby no response will be given by the dog. Then it is known as the neutral stimulus. So there was a training has been given to the dog, that is, before giving the meat powder, Ivan Petrovich rang a bell, then food follows. After training, see the responses. The bell sound, it is a conditioned stimulus. There we will brought out the response saliva for the bell, that is a conditioned response. Bell sound previously it is a neutral stimulus, but after training it becomes conditioned stimulus. And for this conditioned stimulus, we extracted the conditioned response. That is, association of neutral stimulus with natural stimulus or unconditioned stimulus is the main principle behind the classical conditioning. If you see, what is the association here? It is, upon listening thunder sound, we also see the spark. In our brain, there is a association occurs in between sound and the light during the rainy seasons. So before conditioning of the animal, if you ring the bell sound, neutral stimulus, no response. And during conditioning, what we did, we have rang the bell and provided the food material, and thereby we got the unconditioned response to the food material. But after conditioning, after training, what had happened, the neutral stimulus, which is the bell sound, that elicit a appropriate response, that is the conditioned response, that is secretion of saliva. Here, before conditioning, food unconditioned stimulus and saliva unconditioned response. Before conditioning, just only bell ringing, no saliva. And during conditioning, bell ring associated with the food, unconditioned response. And just only you ring the bell after conditioning, then it also gives a saliva, that is a conditioned response. And come to the principles of learning in the classical conditioning. There are 4 principles are involved in the classical conditioning, namely law of contiguity, law of repetition, law of reinforcement, and law of interference. Let us see one by one. What is the law of contiguity? The time interval is less in between unconditioned stimulus and neutral stimulus. That strengthens the conditioned response of the organism. According to Morgan and King, contiguity is internalized in the concept of association. In order to associate two physical events or to associate cerebral responses, they should occur at a time. They should be very close and associate with each other, because contiguity is an important factor that determines the association. Based on situations of learning, there is a change in the factors that should involve in the contiguity. In simple conditioning, learning requires the contiguity of 2 stimuli. In complex situations, learning requires the contiguity of response and reward, and response and punishment. Example, if dog disclose any secret, we will provide some food material as a reward. And if a child tries to touch a burning cigar or burning thing or a flame, then we will give punishment. So here the learning takes place either with the response and reward or with the response and punishment. This is the law of contiguity. Here, whenever the dog discloses a secret, we are giving the food material. When the small child tries to touch the burning cigar, we will punish him. And coming to the law of repetition, repeated exposure of conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus, that strengthens the conditioned response. This law denotes the importance of the training in the conditioning. And coming to the law of reinforcement, this is depend upon the law of effect of the Thorndike experiments. Reinforcement provides strength for the association of conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus. In the paired stimuli that are introduced for simple conditioning, the reinforcement indicates unconditioned stimulus. The specialty that exists in unconditioned stimulus supports the conditioning. Reinforcement is in the form of a reward or punishment, just now we discussed. For example, providing food for a hungry animal, the people get praise from their boss and escape from the punishment, etc., are the reinforcement things. And coming to the law of interference, one association is interfere with another association, thereby none of the two associations is formed as early as they form usually. Example, learning of two languages at a time. Apart from the skills of languages, those children who grown in the families who can speak bilingual language, two languages, they are comparatively backward to that of the children grown in the families who can speak a single language. That is, newly learned language inhibits the conditioned response, that is, decremented conditioned response is seen. And come to the what is the main biochemical process of classical conditioning. Here, unconditioned stimulus enhances the concentration of free calcium ions according to the Ganang experiments during 1989. These calcium ions bound to calmodulin molecule and brings about the activation of the membrane bound enzyme that is known as the adenylate cyclase. Usually adenylate cyclase is the enzyme which can convert the ATP into cyclic AMP. If this enzyme is get activated with neutral stimulus, results in increased production of cyclic AMP. Hence, potassium gated channels are closed and action potential will sustain for longer time, and that much of time the learning takes place. This is all about the classical conditioning and the experiments done by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. Thank you. Thank you one and all. For more videos, watch and subscribe my YouTube channel Swami Zoology. Thank you.